We are so excited to have Tony Bartlett with us today. We probably read Tony's book, Virtual Christianity, about 5 years ago. Was so blessed. That was just the time where we started becoming more familiar with Girardian thinking, and your book has certainly been one of those early influences. So it's been such a joy in our tour of Canada and the US. We made a plan to come and stay with the community that you are building here in Syracuse, New York, and excuse the pronunciation, and have absolutely loved it.
Yeah. You've been a blessing to us to have you here.
Awesome. One of the things that I'm so excited about is about the upcoming book called 7 Stories. Maybe I'll just hand over to you to tell us a little bit about it, but then I want to focus in on one specific area concerning the origins of the Hebrew people and the law. But before we get there, maybe you can just give us a background on the intention, the goal of this book and how it came about.
Yeah, well, my wife and I, Linda, have been calling together a Bible study here in Syracuse, New York for 17 years. And it kind of emerged from the fact that we've always wanted to have a community and the work of a community around us somehow or other. Especially my wife is very concerned with building a community, and I'm concerned with communicating the message. Yeah. But over the course of the meetings, and we basically met every Friday for all those years. I mean, there's been a few we've missed, but people have said, well, can we get this in some kind of written, communicable form so that people can have it? And there was always a difficulty because each topic, each book in the Bible that we treated would be something independent, and it would be very exciting to deal with that material, but then it kind of was lost, and if you put it in a blog, it's still not the same as the actual live experience of the Bible study. Yeah. So anyway, about 5 years ago, as the community continued to grow, we evolved this concept of reducing all the studies we've done to a kind of story pattern. And that there were multiple stories in the Bible, and they're all connected, and they make an overall story, like any interesting novel or big novel would do. That's a collection of stories that are somehow threaded through each other. Yes. So we kind of reduced the whole thing down to 7 stories. Obviously, there are more than 7 stories, but 7 stories sounds good, and it just trips off the tongue kind of thing. So we evolved the book of 7 stories plus introduction, and the introductory cycle has 3 lessons, and each of the 7 stories has 3 lessons. So that makes up a course, a textbook course of 24 meetings, perhaps interspersed with meetings for reflection. But it's basically a workbook or a textbook that can take you through this overall understanding of the biblical scriptures.
We have so thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah. I think one of the things that were gripping as I went through the stories is what you refer to as the symbiotic twist or shift.
The semiotic shift.
Which is, as any good story, the best stories have got this progression and then this shocking revelation that changes the meaning of the whole story.
That's right, yes.
And
you didn't see it before.
No.
And suddenly.
And to find that kind of progression in the scriptures, that you think you're tracking with the story. You think you're understanding what's happening there. Yeah. But unfortunately, what many people have missed is Jesus is one enormous twist to the story.
Right.
Jesus doesn't come to just confirm all our beliefs up to then and tell us how right we've always been. Yeah. He actually brings this total subversion to our whole understanding of who God is, who we are.
It's like the end of a movie when suddenly there's this twist or reveal at the end of the movie, and you're just left, oh, that's what was going on, or
Yes.
that's how it turns out, and you're left kind of suspended off the ground because it's the movie and then the end are so gripping and so enchanting that the story actually physically lifts you up.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it's so beautiful the way that you know, even in your handling through the 7 stories of the scriptures, and you speak about this that the text is like this the stress and strain.
Yeah,
and
right.
You speak about like the tectonic
Plates,
that shift,
working against each other and shifting.
and change the landscape, and
Yeah.
that's how the story's unfolding,
Yeah,
and
right.
ultimately we get the God that our understanding is able to
Right.
grasp.
I mean, it's a very dynamic understanding of the scriptures. It's not a flat kind of mechanical progression of the end is the same as the beginning is the same as the end.
Yes.
It's kind of what you would call boring,
Yes.
like a boring plan. That's not. It has no element of surprise.
Yes.
But that there is this changing dynamic, or there's a dynamic in the scriptures that you don't properly understand to begin with, and then it slowly reveals itself. And that obviously has got to be true of anything that's going to change the human situation and change me. There's got to be something that I don't get at first,
Yes.
and then it breaks through.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and I think a big shift in that, and what you're bringing out in the stories, is this God of non-violence
Yes.
that we have misunderstood.
Yeah.
And I think one of the elements that I think you mentioned of the law and the Hebrew people is a beautiful way.
I was
beautiful
chatting.
twist.
I was chatting to Tony about the fact that we minister a lot in what would be called grace communities, and it's so diverse that if I have to simplify what is the essential quality that causes a group to call themselves a grace-based group, it's probably the most simple explanation is people were involved in a system or a mindset or a belief where their performance or their attendance at church and their discipline, their good lives was perceived as the means by which to gain God's favor, to gain God's approval. And when you come out of a situation and you discover God just likes me because he just can't help himself, and he loves me because that's who he is, and he fully accepts me right here, right now. That is a tremendous moment of release, and that is grace. That's beautiful. Now I know many of the different groups emphasizes different areas and different parts of this theology, but that essence, I think, is beautiful. What happens often in these groups then is that system of performance becomes identified as the law system. And this new experience of freedom becomes identified as grace. And so the law is vilified. The law is religious. The law is, in a way, everything that is wrong and bad with this world is because of the law. But I so appreciated the story that develops how the Hebrew people came about, where the name comes from, and what function the law played within their formation. Would love for you to retell that portion of the story.
Well, that's the first story from Oppression to Justice, and it sets what Andre is talking about. It's setting what you might call a socio-historical scene. In other words, what it was like to be a Hebrew at that time. What did that mean in, let's say, the 13th century, which is the common 13th century BCE, which is the commonly accepted, generally accepted dating for the Exodus. So, and it has to be at some point. It's an historical event which produced the Bible. So, just before I go into that, I just want to mention, and it helps us understand, is that part of the framing of the overall book and the overall presentation of the Bible is it comes from the anthropologist, the theoretical anthropologist whose name is René Girard. Now, I'm not going to go into a big description of what his thinking is, but essentially René Girard has argued and has shown in kind of multiple strands to his argument that the victim, the collective victim of human violence, lies at the heart of human culture and human society, and in fact, kind of world history, where we're sitting now as human beings. The victim has been the kind of foundation of that. Now, it's not that human beings didn't know that; they had some inkling of it, and it's all. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. But he shows, and it's been a huge development in biblical theology, shall we say, or biblical criticism, understanding what the Bible is communicating. He has argued that the Bible is unique in human culture in consistently revealing the victim at the heart of human culture. So you have, right at the very beginning, you have Abel killed by Cain, and Cain becomes the founder of the first city, obviously the founder of culture. You have Joseph, the victim of his brothers. You have Job, who's this kind of stunning individual and stunning book about someone whom everybody kind of like the three friends who are kind of symbolic figures who are saying, "Yeah, you're guilty, dude," and he says, "No, I'm not, I'm not." And then God basically agrees with Job at the end. He says to the friends, the so-called friends, "You did not speak well of me like my servant Job did." So Job got it right, and that's often neglected in that story. So all the way through, people like Jonah, and then of course Jesus himself as the kind of climactic example of a victim who was vindicated by God by being raised up. So it's a very different, still very faithful, absolutely faithful to the narrative, the overall narrative, but it's a very different understanding of what's going on in the overall story of the Bible. So that we have to say that's part of how the book works, and then that's introduced at greater length in the first section. So, however, then getting to the question of the Hebrews, essentially what we have is a class of victims. That's who the Hebrews are, and regardless of the socio history that we present, the Bible says it. They were slaves. They were submitted to. Outcasts. They were outcasts, and they were despised.
So it's not a specific race.
It's not. Yeah, that's right. So God says, "I will take you as my people." He intervenes with this group, and we say that you have to, and this is kind of the basis of this is explained in the book or given in the book, that there is this class of people in the ancient Near East, and evidence of them spans basically the millennium before Christ. So we're thinking of a whole 1,000 years, maybe a little bit more, up to kind of like 0 and the first year of the Common Era. And the name that is given to them, which is common from Mesopotamia down into Egypt, is Hapiru. There are different kind of like spellings of it, but basically it's Hapiru. It's nothing to do with being happy. It's not being happy, because they were a class of outcasts, dispossessed, stateless people who were regarded as dangerous, as worthy of contempt, and their main way of surviving was as basically mercenaries for hire. People who would kind of hire themselves out to a local warlord or a chief or a king of a small city-state, whatever, to provide military, to provide basically kind of like strong arm for this person. But they were also, there's examples of them being indentured labor, semi-slaves. And when we look at the evidence about people like Abraham or David, for example, the word Hebrew is used in relationship to these figures very much as in the condition of being either kind of mercenaries or indentured people, people without rights.
So it's quite likely that Hebrew was developed out of Hebrew.
Absolutely, that's right. So the argument is that the name Hebrew, which becomes second nature to the Israelites, they remember that they are Hebrews.
Yes.
But then they get called Israelites because of their descent from Jacob and because they have a land called Israel.
Yes.
But their condition was Hapiru, and
Yes.
Hebrew is a verbal form of Hapiru. So they were basically this dispossessed class.
Yes.
So then...
That for me is, in the first place, just an amazing setting for the story to begin.
Right.
Because the gods are normally on the side of the established rule.
Yes.
But here something dramatic happens within
Right.
human history, a God who concerns himself for the outcasts.
Right.
But the one specific thing that I want to focus on here is, what does it mean to this class of people who are dispossessed, who have no rights, who have no protection? What does it mean for them to receive the law?
Right. So we read in Exodus that God says, "I've heard the groaning of my people."
Yes.
That's repeated at multiple places especially chapter 3.
Yes.
Their cry has come to me. So suddenly, through Moses, we have this, and Moses is the one who gets the call from this God, and God says, "I've heard the cry of these people. I want you to go back to Egypt and bring them into freedom." There's this God who has an ear and a heart for the miserable and the dispossessed and the stateless, the unimportant people of history. Not the pharaohs, not the priestly class, the scribe class of Egypt, whatever. It's these dispossessed people. So that is one enormous revolution in cultural formation. That suddenly there is a God who is obvious to God. God is the source of meaning and purpose in human life, especially at that point.
Yes.
Suddenly there's this God on the side of this non-people. These people who are not a people. And then he says, I'm going to do something about that. So he sends Moses, as we all know, to Egypt, and then Moses has all his troubles, and but he finally sets them free, and they journey forth for a long while in the wilderness, but they finally get to the promised land. And the really crucial thing is that he's not just setting them free, he's going to give them a law.
Yes.
So what is a God who's going to set people free from that condition? What's it going to do, he or she? What is that God going to do? Give them another form of oppression?
Yeah.
He's going to give them a code by which they do not repeat
Yes.
those forms of life that oppress others.
Yes.
So for example, the covenant code, the codes of Exodus are larger than the Ten Commandments, but essentially taking the Ten Commandments, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not bear false witness, and you shall not kill. These are things to stop people oppressing or depersonalizing, marginalizing, taking away the life of others.
Yeah.
That's what. So this is what we're saying and have been saying, is that the law initially is grace because it's liberation.
It's beautiful.
It sets people free from what's killing them.
Yes.
So then it stands to reason that when Jesus comes and says, "I come not to abolish the law, to fulfill it," that is absolutely true.
Yes.
Yeah, he's grace he just brings the grace of the original set of the code by which to live. He brings it to the surface in a radical way.
That's
so there's
so
an absolute
beautiful.
continuity.
Isn't it so amazing
Yeah.
in terms of this group of people, this outcast group who gets given really a gift
They do.
of
Yeah.
the law.
Yeah.
And then I so loved how you drew that and you took the those commandments,
Mm-hmm.
and then you took the Sermon on the Mount,
Right.
and you start
Yeah.
bringing out this God you introduced in Jesus, who establishes this intimate relationship, introduces us into his fellowship with his Father,
Right.
which then outworks into our service of community.
Right.
How this relates in our relationship with mankind.
Absolutely.
And that was beautiful. If you could elaborate on that.
Well, Jesus is a genius. I mean, I don't, like we got used to calling him the Son of God, which I believe he is, that there is the mystery of the Trinity and etc. But in human terms, what he did and how he spoke was sheer genius. So if you think, in Matthew's Gospel, in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5 through 6, we've got what we call the 6 antitheses. And it says, you have heard how it was said, I tell you. You have heard how it says, you will love your neighbor, hate your enemy. I tell you, love your enemy and do good to those who persecute you, do harm to you. So Jesus does this kind of configuring and redimensioning of those basic commandments, or those strands in the Old Testament, because when it says you should hate your enemy, people say, well, where does it actually say that? Well, it says that you should go forth and kill your enemy. That's basically hating, So what Jesus does in terms of the law, which we've already said is grace and liberation, he says, well, when you get a commandment like that, you shall not steal, for example. That is employing a prohibition, a negation, and of course, as human beings, we need that, and children need that. Children, you say to a child, "Don't go out there on a busy road; you might get killed," or you need to come in and wash your hands, get ready for your dinner, and if you don't, there'll be time out or something. We have we work by negations, and so the law in that initial experience did work by negation. Thou shalt not steal, and we understand that, But when Jesus comes along, he says, in that antithesis, when someone takes your coat, so it's the other way around, this person is stealing from you, give him your shirt as well. So what Jesus does, and that's true in all the 6 antitheses, which basically parallel the last 6 commandments. Those, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. It basically parallels those last 6 commandments. We show that. He says, what you do is take the mechanism itself, whereby you've got something, and I take it away from you, or vice versa, and then we're in a situation of stealing, but the rule says you shall not steal, and that law, that way of negating it, is a kind of counter pressure against you, and a form of counter violence. He says, overcome that, and realize the grace of thou shalt not steal by absolute self-giving, by absolute surrender of all that stuff. It's incredibly radical, but it does the trick. It undoes not just the offense of stealing, but the very mechanism that makes it an offense, and that makes me want to then retaliate against you.
So beautiful. It just makes me think, just in this, so I'm not just preventing myself from stealing. I'm preventing the other person from stealing, not through violence, but through giving.
Yes, that's right.
And in the extreme form, I'm thinking of Jesus preventing us from becoming guilty of murder, in a way. By, in our act of murder, giving his life.
Yes, that's right.
And it's so beautiful.
Because he exemplified to the nth degree what he was teaching there in the Sermon on the Mount.
And so in the resurrection, that is almost the absolute undoing of our most evil act of murder, because if you imagine this court in which humanity is accused of, you murdered the Son of God, But here our victim walks into the court alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That takes away all the evidence
Yes.
of our
That's
murder.
absolutely right.
So the resurrection is our forgiveness because
Yeah.
there's no longer a victim.
Right.
How can we be guilty
It's
if there is
astonishing.
no body?
Yeah, I mean, even just in, I mean, I'm a Christian. I believe in the reality of the resurrection and the bodily resurrection. But even as a story,
Yes.
I mean, if you think, so that's why we talk in terms of semiotic shift.
Yeah.
The story, which is now it's kind of common currency in our culture, you know, death and resurrection of Jesus. It's always saying that, you know,
Yes.
the evidence is destroyed. I mean,
Yes.
you are no longer, the worst thing you could have done is overcome by the self-giving of God into that system.
Love it.
So that is, I mean, part of the argument with, to kind of push my other book, Virtual Christian, part of the argument is that retelling of the story with that astonishing end has
Yes.
entered into our culture and is working against all
Yes.
at the level of signs, of semiotics and of story, it's working against the way we work in the world. So
Yeah.
so despite all the confusion and the anger and hatred in the world, one of the reasons for it is that the world itself is upset with this
Yes.
story. It doesn't know what to do with
Yeah.
it, and it
Yeah.
wants to crush it. So it gets more and more angry. But that actually manifests the story again and again underneath, and it becomes even more powerful. So it's like there's no holding back. Ultimately, there's no stopping
Yes.
the work of God's redeeming love in the world.
Yes. Yes. And now we can look back on the law.
Yep.
And maybe, you know, I know most of the audience we speak to that would identify with the grace message.
Right.
We can now look at the law as part of this beautiful story.
Right.
Instead of always just having this antagonistic view of
dualistic, yeah.
this is grace against law,
Right.
this is our freedom against religion. We can recognize that the law was a beautiful stage within this unfolding
Amen.
story
Mm-hmm.
in which a people who were constantly subject to abuse,
Mm-hmm.
where people could come and take from them, steal from them,
Yeah.
kill them.
Right. Take
The
their
lo-
wives. You know, remember
Yes.
Abraham's wife
Yes.
and Isaac's wife. There are little stories about the Pharaoh or the
Yes.
king taking these wives. Well, that's because they were happy root. They had no
Yes.
rights.
Yeah.
And suddenly the law becomes their protector.
Yeah, right.
It is grace to them. It's not the opposite
That's
of
right.
grace.
That's what the Jewish people would say.
Yeah.
The covenant is grace.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So we can see how the law even is part of this beautiful story in which God is subverting the way in which we relate to one another,
Yes.
the way in which we relate to Him. And I love the shift in the Beatitudes, where Jesus
Yes.
takes it even a step further,
Yeah.
where it's no longer just be careful that you don't steal,
Yeah.
and not just try and prevent other people from stealing,
Yeah.
but give.
Yeah.
That's
give,
right.
give so much that the
If they
others
want your
can't
coat,
steal.
Yes.
What? You giving me your shirt too? What's wrong with you? You know?
Love it. Tony, it's been such an absolute joy
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to
Well-
spend
Yes,
time
been.
with you and
Well-
the community here.
Yeah.
We have thoroughly enjoyed it. And hey, if you see the 7 stories coming out, we'll post the link when it's published in the next few months. It's one of the most accessible books with a depth of theology and has all the elements of a beautiful, surprising twist at the end, which we cannot recommend it more highly if we tried. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mary-Anne.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.